Well, I have to say, those unelected bureaucrats in Brussels are not exactly laugh-a-minute and fun and exciting, are they? However, it was an important speech, and the EU have made some significant concessions. The question is, have they given enough? Well, joining me now is the Chief Whip of the Democratic Unionist Party, Sammy Wilson MP. Sammy, good evening. You've heard...
Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening. You've heard what Mr Šefčovič had to say. He's talking about... obviously, medicines, he was very specific about. The medicines could move back and forth freely, and that was something that the Commission President threatened to interfere with, if you remember, earlier this year. But they're also talking about an 80% reduction in the amount of bureaucracy and checks that take place, trade coming from the mainland to Northern Ireland. Is that enough, Sammy Wilson, to satisfy you to think that the Northern Ireland Protocol is workable in this form?
Nigel, when you strip away all of the rhetoric which we have heard today from the EU, it is quite clear that as far as they're concerned, Northern Ireland will still remain part of the EU single market, even though the United Kingdom voted to leave. Secondly, the European Court of Justice will administer European laws which will be imposed in Northern Ireland without any say by either the British government or the Northern Ireland Assembly. And thirdly, that some of the concessions which have been made on trade are really very minor compared to what is happening at the moment. Because don't forget, 20% of all EU border checks at present occur between GB and Northern Ireland. That's more than happens in Rotterdam. It's more than happens on the whole of the eastern boundary.
Yeah, but Sammy, that's what's going to change. I mean, the point he's making, and you're quite right, that when it came to the European Court of Justice, he was asked a question about that, and he hasn't given an inch, from what I can see, because I know that Lord Frost was looking for an independent arbitration panel. That clearly is not being offered. But on the number of checks, he is talking about an 80% reduction in them. Well,
he said up to an 80% reduction. And of course, it will depend upon the goods. There will also still be checks, the checks on paperwork, which he says will be reduced by 50%. Well, when you consider that Marks and Spencer are saying that for a lorry load of goods going to a Marks and Spencer store, there are about 700 pages of papers which are required. He's going to reduce this now to 350. It's still a major barrier to trade. And one of the reasons why many firms in GB have decided not to trade in Northern Ireland is simply because not even the physical checks, the pure level of paperwork which is now required to get goods into Northern Ireland.
Well, Sammy, I fully understand that's been the case. He says there is an up to 80% reduction. We'll see. But on the first point you made, I mean, this is what Boris Johnson signed up to. Boris Johnson signed up to Northern Ireland being effectively continuing to be part of the single market. So maybe, Sammy Wilson, maybe your upset and anger shouldn't be at Mr Šefčovič. After all he's doing is trying to amend slightly a treaty that the British government entered into and that Parliament passed. Maybe your anger ought to be directed at the man who came to your annual conference in 2018 as Foreign Secretary and told you that a Conservative government would never do this. Maybe Boris Johnson is the villain in your eyes, not the European Commission.
And that's why all of our pressure has been on the government at Westminster to make the changes. I mean, we know that the EU, having got this concession from the UK government, is not going to give it up easily. So therefore, the pressure has to be on the people who actually signed the deal in the first place. And I'm encouraged that Lord Frost in his command paper has recognised that there are three issues that need to be dealt with. First of all, the whole issue of EU laws applying to Northern Ireland. Yeah. Secondly, the European Court adjudicating on those laws. And thirdly, the checks which result from those laws. Because don't forget, Nigel, the reason why we have checks on goods coming into Northern Ireland from GB is that Northern Ireland laws are now different and regulations are now different from those which pertain in the rest of the United Kingdom because of the deal which has been done. And yes, the Prime Minister does have a responsibility because he signed the agreement. He signed it against the advice that we gave. He signed it against the way he had voted himself many times, 3 times in the House of Commons when he voted down Theresa May's deal. But his argument, of course, is that, well, the withdrawal agreement itself allowed for flexibility. It allowed for Article 16, where the government could act unilaterally in certain circumstances. And the political declaration talked about alternative arrangements. And my view is that there are alternative arrangements, mutual recognition of each other's regulations and imposed by both the European Union and the UK when people and firms trade across the border. That's the way forward. And don't forget, Nigel, this isn't all that difficult to do. Only about 5% of firms in Northern Ireland actually sell into the Republic. 4% of our sales go into the EU. So there's not a massive amount. No,
it can be done.
It can be done.
I mean, I get that. I get it can be done. The truth of it is, Boris Johnson, there was no real criticism coming from the big UK press, London-based. We'd been through years of agony with Brexit. The message people wanted to hear is, this is it. It's the oven-ready deal. I think he knew what he was doing. I think he threw you under the bus, but thought we could sort it out another day. Given that this appears to be as far as the Commission are prepared to go, and I fully understand your points about mutual recognition and all the rest of it, which is how, after all, how trade takes place across much of the world, with or without formal trade agreements. Has the time come to trigger Article 16 and to scrap the protocol? Is that what we should be doing?
We have always argued that's the only answer. The protocol is poison in the Northern Ireland political system. The Northern Ireland Assembly is very likely to collapse in the next 3 or 4 months as a result of the protocol. And, if you think of it, if you're an elected representative in Northern Ireland, why and how could you justify sitting in an assembly where every week EU laws are imposed in Northern Ireland? They're not even referred to the Assembly. You're elected as a lawmaker, and somebody else outside your country introduces laws, doesn't even take about them.
Isn't that why we voted Brexit? That's why we voted Brexit.
Why we voted to get out. I remember in many rallies when you and I spoke at rallies, and that was the whole point. We want responsibility and decision-making back in our own hands. Now, it's happened for the rest of the United Kingdom. It hasn't happened for Northern Ireland. And my argument to many politicians in Northern Ireland, even those who voted Remain, if you have any dignity, for goodness sake, you're elected to do a job. Don't let somebody else do that job for you. And then if you don't obey their rules, a foreign court comes in and stamps all over you and imposes sanctions. That's not democracy. And that's why I don't believe that there's an alternative to tinkering with the Northern Ireland Protocol. It has to go. And if you read the command paper, that's exactly what the government is saying in the command paper. Because if what they recommend in the command paper was introduced, then there wouldn't be a Northern Ireland Protocol.
No, Sammy Wilson, thank you very much indeed for joining us here tonight and responding to Mr. Šefčovič from the European Commission. And I have to say that Brussels have given a bit. Of that, there's no question. There has been some compromise.